Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So I know that a lot of you feel beat down by the trucking market right now because of the volume situation. So instead of talking about how much freight there is or isn't on the market, let's talk about capacity instead and focus on some predictions from folks about the near future. As you all know, there are two hot topics right now: the English proficiency and the non-domiciled CDLs, and both of them have something to do with capacity. So again, let's get out our crystal ball and look into the future with the help of some articles that recently came out. Ready? Let's go! So let's start with this new out-of-service criteria, which now includes the English language proficiency and is set to take full effect on June 25th of this year. What will it do to capacity? Well, Avery Weiss of FTR Intel believes that if the FMCSA and inspectors actually take this mandate seriously, we are going to see an uptick in rates. He said, and I quote, "If FMCSA's mandate now is to both make ELP a universal out-of-service violation and eliminate the availability of tools to make compliance easier, perhaps we will see violations swell to levels close to what we saw in the early 2010s, hitting around 80,000 to 100,000 drivers annually." Then we have Ken Adamo from DAT, who believes that this ELP mandate is going to have a similar effect to the ELD mandate when it came out in 2017. He actually believes that when enforcement is in full swing, we are going to see about 5 to 10% of the capacity leave the market. And while it is very difficult to predict what that is going to do or what effect it will have on a very soft market, he believes, and I quote, "It would put the overall capacity pool below the long-term pre-COVID trend and almost certainly drive rates upward." And he estimates that those rates are going to go up by 10 to 15% with higher gains possible depending on external factors. Now, to answer a question that I know someone is going to have, well, is this going to get enforced consistently across states? Adamo says that it doesn't matter if there is consistency in enforcement, it will still have an effect on rates where they will go higher. Now, a question that I never really thought about until I read an Overdrive article: which market is it going to affect? Is it going to affect the contract market or the spot market? According to Overdrive, it depends on where those non-English speaking folks are. I quote, "If truck drivers without ELP mostly work at big fleets, the drop might be expected to impact the contract market. On the other hand, if these drivers are mostly working for carriers who work off the spot market," and there are a ton of carriers like that with 80 to 100 to 120 trucks, "then we're going to see an effect on the spot market." And then we have Dean Croak of DAT, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and he said that even a 1% point change in capacity on the spot market can have some very big effects. According to Croak, the spot market represents about 15% of the total market, and I quote, "A 2% reduction in overall carrier capacity, for example, can represent a much bigger reduction in the spot market capacity, often around 13 to 14%. Now, speaking of sidelining a ton of drivers and other external factors that can end up having an effect on capacity, of course, we have to talk about those non-domiciled CDLs. So what is a non-domiciled CDL? There is a lot of confusion about this. Well, I'm going to quote this. "It's when a person who is not a resident of the state but has an employment authorization document or an unexpired foreign passport with an approved I-94 record gets a CDL." So we're not talking about US citizens here or lawful permanent residents, green card holders. Now, as many of you guys are aware, when the executive order was signed regarding English proficiency in the trucking industry, there was also a section calling for a review of non-domiciled CDLs. There has been a ton of speculation about how many non-domiciled CDLs have been issued, but now we actually have concrete numbers. Overdrive Overdrive, thank God for Overdrive, they contacted 13 states to see how many of those CDLs, the non-domiciled ones, each state issued, and they heard back from some of them, including California, Illinois, Texas, Oregon, Washington, South Carolina, and Maine. Now, speaking of California, California doesn't even track how many non-domiciled CDLs it issues. It's very surprising not. But the other states, yeah, they do have the data. And I'm going to read this because I can't remember this many numbers. Illinois, for example, in 2015 issued 80 non-domiciled CDLs. So that was in 2015. In 2025, 10 years later, 40% of all CDLs issued in the state of Illinois are non-domiciled. In terms of numbers, that's 12,605 of them issued since 2020 and 13,668 since 2015. And that's just the state of Illinois. So now let's move on to Texas. We'll talk about Texas and then we'll come back to Texas because there was an update. So in 2015, only about 1.64% of all CDLs issued or renewed were non-domiciled. And as of 2024, it's closer to 3%, more exactly 2.84%. We will come back to this. Washington State, total 5,481 of them, and it increased from 4% before 2020 to 16% in 2024. Now, Oregon, they broke it down by year. 11 of them issued in 2020, 54 in 2021, 140 in 2022, 445 in 2023, and 382 in 2024, which brings the total to 1,032 non-domiciled CDLs in the past 5 years. South Carolina says it only issued 762 of them, and Maine stated that it was 395. Now, I'm not sure I believe those numbers right off the bat, and this is only for one reason. This survey was done on April 30th of 2025, and on May 5th, which is yesterday, Overdrive actually got another report from Texas, which showed that their initial calculations were slightly off. They actually issued, brace yourself, 51,993 non-domiciled CDLs from 2015 until 2024. The latest number in 2024 is 6,265 of them. Now, this type of CDL, the non-domiciled one, is one thing. The real issue is with how these CDLs are issued, with the training. The problem is the training is all over the place depending on your location, your state, etc. And no one really oversees these CDL schools. But what happens if there is one national CDL test standard? And as FreightWave says, one training, one test, one set of expectations, regardless of which location or state you are in. And then a follow-up question is what happens if there are actual real audits done on these CDL schools? My prediction is that the CDL issuances will start going down. The point of this video and of this prediction is the following. Capacity has been an ongoing issue in the market for the past 3 years. But now capacity is sort of at a crossroads, from the ELP being back on the out-of-service criteria to the fact that non-domiciled CDLs are being reviewed, albeit we do not know what this review process means, to the market becoming so challenging that folks stopped asking, how do we survive long enough to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and started asking, is it even worth trying to survive? If capacity drops significantly, yes, we are going to see a change in the market. But what about the volume that currently keeps dropping? Well, here are some scenarios. If volume and capacity drop proportionately, you will hardly feel a thing. You are not going to feel the rates change as much. If capacity drops at a quicker pace than volumes do, you are going to see an uptick in rates, and vice versa. If volumes drop faster than capacity does, you are going to see a downturn in rates. But here's a question I would love for you to ponder. How long can volumes keep dropping? How quickly can they recover? And how quickly can capacity recover after a drop? Now, I have my own ideas and my own answers to these questions, but I would much rather hear yours and learn from you. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining and watching today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.